Hi everyone, welcome to the next review video for the Biology or Living Environments regions. This is Unit 2, Topic 1, Biochemistry. So the first thing in this unit is the difference between polymers and monomers. So firstly, monomers are small organic molecules, and these are the building blocks of polymers. So the monomers are going to be your smaller units that you get, and then your polymers, so I'll write here in a second. Polymers are large organic molecules that are made up of a chain of monomers. So these can be arranged in various ways, but just think multiple monomers together form one polymer. So the next thing we have under polymers and monomers is how you get between the two. So the first is dehydration synthesis. And when you think of synthesis, you want to think of building or putting together. So dehydration synthesis is building large molecules or polymers. So dehydration synthesis is when multiple monomers, it can be two monomers or more, come together to form a larger molecule or a polymer. And then hydrolysis is the opposite. Think lysis is digestion, which is breaking apart larger molecules. And this will break polymers down back into their monomers. Okay, so now we have the type of compounds. So there are two compounds you need to know. The first are inorganic molecules, which do not contain both carbon and hydrogen. So some examples that are very common are water, which is H2O. It doesn't have carbon and hydrogen. And then other things like CO2. While CO2 has carbon, it does not have both carbon and hydrogen, so it'd be considered inorganic. On the other hand, we have the organic molecules, and organic molecules are molecules that contain both carbon and hydrogen. So a big example of this, which is very important in our body, is glucose, which is C6H12O6, and because it has both that CH, it would be considered organic. So down here below, there are a few major organic molecules that you're going to need to know. So the first are carbohydrates, which is the polymer. For all of these, you want to know their polymer, monomers, functions, and examples. So the monomer of carbohydrates are simple sugars. So, for example, starch is made of multiple glucose molecules that are put together. Now, the main function of carbohydrates is quick energy. So these are your main source of quick energy in the body. If your body needs energy, they primarily go for carbohydrates, which is why glucose is primarily used in cell respiration. An example food where you could get this, or example of molecule, are glucose, which we use for cell respiration, fructose, which we find in lots of fruits, starch, which is in lots of things, and glycerol. So those are all some examples of carbohydrates. And an example food source with lots of carbs, we could think bread and pasta. So whenever we think of foods with high carbs, we think like bready things, which contain lots of starch, and anything sweet likely has lots of glucose. So the next one you want to know are proteins. Proteins are very important for muscle growth. They're enzymes that make up all the antibodies in the body, which we'll look at later. And their building block or monomer are amino acids. So multiple amino acids form a larger polypeptide chain, which comes together to form a protein. So their main functions, they have a lot of main functions. They can build and repair tissue, which are the ones that are primarily used for muscle tissues. They can speed up chemical reactions, which are enzymes. Those help speed up our reactions, and they can help to fight disease. So some examples of these, as we just said, are enzymes, hormones, and antibodies. And finally, you can think of some major food sources where you find this. Think if you're bulking and you want to eat a lot of protein for the gym, you can get this in meat, things like eggs. These all have lots of proteins in. And now the final large organic molecule that you want to know are lipids. So lipids are another word for fats, basically. So your lipids are your large fats. And these are made of glycerol and the three fatty acids. So their monomers are glycerol and fatty acids. So their main function, they have two large functions. One is energy storage. So if you have any long-term energy, that will likely be stored in lipids because they can hold large amounts of energy. And the second is that it acts as cushioning for organs. So if you get hit, the fat kind of acts as a buffer so any of your vital internal organs don't get too damaged. And now some examples of large lipids in your body are phospholipids, which are large chains of lipids, and also cholesterol. Cholesterol is very important lipid found in the cell membrane and across the body. And finally, some food places where you can get lipids. Think of any fatty things. You can get olive oil, which has fats. Well, it has healthy fats, but it still has fats. Nuts have lots of fat, and also there are many fatty meats, which are key sources of lipids. Okay, and now the last thing in this topic are indicators. Indicators are what they sound like. They indicate that some substance is present. So they indicate presence of a substance. There are two large main indicators that you want to know for this. The first is iodine. Iodine is a starch indicator. And the way that you know that it's starch is that its color changes from a yellowish amber color and it goes to a blue or black color. So if this iodine indicator suddenly turns very, very dark, then you know that starch is present. And the second you want to know is called Benedict's solution. Benedict's solution is the indicator that is used for any glucose solutions or solutions that contain glucose in it, or it could really be used for other simple sugars as well, but is primarily for glucose. And the way you'll know if glucose is present is if the indicator changes from a bluish color to a red when it's heated. So those are the indicators you want to know. So now we have some review questions down at the bottom. Okay, so the first one is number 77. A student was setting up beakers that contained different solutions in order to conduct a laboratory investigation. But the next day, he could not tell which beaker contained the starch and water mixture. In order to find out which beaker contained starch, he took a small sample from each of the beakers and conducted a test of starch for each of them. Describe the test for starch that the student should use and the result that would indicate the presence of starch. So this question is really just asking which indicator is used for starch. So for this question, we have to remember that iodine is used for starch. So the answer for this would be use iodine indicator. And then we know that glucose is present if it changes from blue to black. So then we can just write, if it changes from blue to black, amber to blue, then starch is present. And that's all we need to write for that one. Okay, so our next one is a multiple choice, number 17, that says, fat molecules typically contain long chains of carbon atoms. Animals tend to store fats for use when food resources are scarce. This is an advantage to the animals because, either 1, much energy can be gained by breaking the bonds between atoms in the fat. 2, fats give off carbon dioxide that can be used by the muscles. 3, amino acids from fat synthesis are more easily digested than carbohydrates. And 4, energy can only be created by digesting fats. So let's go through this. The first, we know that 4 is quite definitely not our answer because most energy is created by digesting carbohydrates with glucose and cell respiration. Next, I'm just kind of going bottom up here. Amino acids from fat synthesis are more easily digested than carbohydrates. We know this one is also not our answer because carbohydrates are typically used as a quick energy source and they're used in cell respiration, which means that they're typically more easily digested than lipids. Also, this says amino acids from fat synthesis. We know that amino acids form proteins, so fat synthesis would not be yielding amino acids. So this is wrong on multiple levels. Second is that fats give off carbon dioxide that can be used by the muscles. There's no reason why fats would give off carbon dioxide or the carbon dioxide would be used by the muscles. So this would also not be our answer. That leaves us with number 1, that much energy can be gained by breaking the bonds between atoms in the fat. And we know this is true because the atoms and the chemical bonds between them can be broken down as when long-term energy is needed, which is one of the main uses of lipids. So number 1 would be our best answer here. And 2 more questions. So the next is from the very first question. There are over 2,000 kinds of edible insects in the world, and they are becoming an increasingly popular source of protein. 1 cup of cricket flour contains over 28 grams of protein. The building blocks of the protein in cricket flour are... So this is basically just asking us straight up, what are the building blocks or monomers of proteins? So we would just have to remember that amino acids build up proteins. Water is not a monomer. Simple sugars make carbohydrates, and carbohydrates are the large polymer. And now we have our last question. The two diagrams below represent a sugar molecule and a fat molecule that are used by living organisms. Which statement best describes these two molecules? So the first are that sugar molecules are inorganic and fat molecules are organic. So we can test this out. If it would be inorganic, the sugar molecule would need to not have both carbon and hydrogen. But we can see that here it has both a carbon and a hydrogen, so we know that it is organic, which means that number 1 can't be our answer. The second one says sugar molecules are organic and fat molecules are inorganic. So we can look again. We know that sugar molecules are organic because we just tested that. And if we look at fat molecules, we can also see there's a C and an H right there, which means that fat molecules are also organic. So this one cannot be our answer. Next, number 3, it says energy for life processes can be stored within the chemical bonds of both molecules. And then number 4 says it can be stored within the chemical bonds of the sugar molecules only. So our best answer for this would be number 3, because while it is true that energy for life processes are stored in bonds in sugar that are used for cell respiration, breaking the bonds in fat molecules can also be used in many cases, and that's why fats are stored as long-term energy storage. As if there isn't sufficient sugar or carbohydrates, the bonds between fat molecules can be broken down to also provide energy. So number 3 would be our best answer here. And that's it. Thank you guys for listening.